I am Emily Carter, 30 years old, and this morning Boston was so cold that even the rose bushes at Riverside Gardens shivered as much as I did. My phone buzzed. I picked it up and heard my mother's voice. "Enjoy marrying your plumber. We won't be embarrassed with you." The call ended, and my entire life seemed to crash onto the cold tile floor. I stood frozen in front of the mirror. The wedding veil was like a cloud caught in ice. I had imagined romantic rain, a torn dress, even a lost ring, but I never imagined my parents would outright reject me, leaving behind such a venomous blessing. Boston was crisp at noon. Outside, guests were arriving, music playing softly. In the bride's room, the scent of orange blossoms hung heavy. I pressed my forehead against the window, watching the Charles River sparkle, wondering why the water was so calm when my heart was in turmoil. My mother, Margaret Carter, believed family honor was a dress that must never wrinkle, and she chose to iron it flat by erasing me from the ceremony. A knock at the door. Lisa, my best friend, peeked in. "You okay?" I nodded, a gesture so small I barely believed it myself. When the door closed, my phone lit up again. A message from my father. "Charity gala tonight can't be missed, you understand?" I let out a dry laugh. The gala was timed perfectly with my walk down the aisle. How refined. As a financial advisor, I'm used to forecasting risks. I had prepared for empty chairs, a cold remark. I hadn't prepared for that call. It wasn't just rejection, it was a verdict. Our daughter ruined the brand, and to them, the brand always mattered more than the person. The door opened. Daniel walked in, against tradition, but tradition had already chosen the other side. He wore a deep blue suit, his brown eyes looking at me with a gentleness that spoke a silent language amid the world's noise. "You okay?" he asked. Tears came fast, uninvited. Daniel sat in front of me, lightly touching my knee. "We're getting married for love, not for them." Those 4 words, "not for them," pulled me from the depths. I took a deep breath, smoothing the veil. I'm angry because I tried so hard to be recognized. I heard myself admit what I'd hidden for years. Growing up in the polished Beacon Hill mansion, I learned the wrong lesson. To be loved, you must wear the right badge. I studied hard, behaved, worked diligently. But that badge never shone as brightly as the red bow on Olivia's BMW at 16. Daniel smiled. "I love you when you rummage through the pantry for instant noodles at midnight, love how you argue about monetary policy, but still remember to water the basil on the windowsill. No badge can do that." I laughed, the sadness receding like a tide. But in the mirror, the space where my mother's reflection should have been, remained empty. Lisa returned. "5 minutes. Uncle Henry's waiting." Uncle Henry, my father's brother, was the only one who promised, "I'll be there," and actually showed up. He had a habit of tying his tie twice, once for himself, once for the person he loved. I suddenly wanted to hug him right then. I stood, the dress flaring like a lake rippled by a pebble. Daniel adjusted his boutonniere, taking a deep breath as if preparing for the toughest repair of his life. I remembered the first night we met, a burst pipe, water spraying like a private rain. His hands bore scars, warm, steady. Those hands had built a fence around my heart. My phone buzzed again, a message in the family group chat. A photo of the gala, polished words, a heart emoji. Not a single question about me. I turned the phone face down like closing an old book. I didn't want to be a supporting character in someone else's story anymore. Lisa handed me a tissue. "My bride, today you rewrite the Carter house." I laughed, more like rewriting the spelling of happiness. The music shifted. The MC tested the mic. "1, 2, ladies and gentlemen." The sound was like a milestone, opening a public trial between me and prejudice. The verdict I wanted to declare: from now on, I live by my own rules. Uncle Henry appeared. Ty nodded a second time. He smiled. "My girl, let's go." I took his arm, feeling that a small flame was enough to warm me, no need for the bonfire of prestige. The white curtains led to the garden, swaying lightly in the breeze. I glanced back at Daniel. He winked. "I'm here." That was enough. Outside, wooden chairs lined between young maples, sunlight filtering through leaves like scattered coins. I heard Lisa's sharp intake of breath as the music swelled, heard a child ask their mother why the bride wore white. I thought of my mother, who chose the color of honor over love, and wondered if white was truly innocent. Just before the flower-strewn aisle, I thought, I'll send my parents a photo, not to gloat, but to close a chapter. I didn't know which photo yet, only that today the story belonged to me. Each step was a stitch mending an old tear. I saw Daniel at the end of the aisle, standing tall, hands clasped, half smiling, half nervous. When our eyes met, the empty chairs, absent faces, and gossip shrank to specks of dust in the sunlight. "The bride will pause for a moment," the MC said, as if reading my heartbeat. I smiled faintly. Then I walked on. "Dear friend, if you've ever felt dismissed by those you love, at a wedding, in your career, or at a dinner table, know you're not alone. I share this story not to judge my family, but to invite you to reflect. Whose badge are you wearing? If these words resonate, leave a message, and I understand, so we don't walk through these monumental days in silence. If there's a place that made me both proud and suffocated, it's the Beacon Hill mansion where I spent most of my childhood. The 3-acre estate, with its gray granite walls, gleaming arched windows, and a lawn trimmed to the precision of a blade, was like a giant calling card my parents sent to all of Boston. This is Carter Properties, and this is us. They say a home reflects its owner's soul. If so, the Beacon Hill mansion was the truest portrait of my father, Richard Carter. Cold, sharp, and obsessed with maintaining a perfect facade. He built Carter Properties from nothing, turning it into a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. He loved retelling that story at every party, as if his impoverished past was a prized scar he both flaunted and hid. My mother, Margaret, was his left hand, though not on paper. She didn't work directly in the business but managed the image. To her, every cocktail party, every magazine feature, every handshake at a charity gala was as crucial as a land deal. She lived to prove the Carter family was a flawless brand, and I, sadly, was the inkblot on that silk. I still remember a winter evening when I was about 8. The family gathered in the living room, vast as a small cathedral, with chandelier light glinting off polished wood floors. I excitedly showed off a landscape painting I'd done at school, hoping for praise. My father glanced at it, nodded as if signing off on a minor contract, then set it aside. Moments later, Olivia, my 6-year-old sister, twirled in, wearing a pink tulle dress. The room erupted in applause, my mother kissing her cheek as if a princess had arrived. I clutched my painting, my hands suddenly heavy. Olivia was always the star. If I brought home an A, my father nodded coolly. If Olivia got a B, the family went out for ice cream. If I won a debate competition, my mother reminded me to stand straighter, don't slouch. If Olivia told a bland joke, the table roared with laughter. In that house, I was the diligent worker, while Olivia was the Carter brand's princess. This favoritism wasn't just in small moments. It was systemic, an unwritten law. At 16, my father handed me a $50 envelope. "Happy birthday, you know saving is important." 3 months later, Olivia turned 16. A white BMW appeared in the driveway, topped with a red bow half the size of the roof. The neighborhood came to gawk. My father declared, "She needs a vehicle to network, build connections." I stood by my bedroom window, watching the spectacle, and understood my worth in their eyes would never exceed $50. That memory didn't make me cry. It made me laugh, a hollow, brittle laugh. I began to realize, in the Carter house, fairness was a luxury item, displayed but never used. Perhaps that's why I turned to books early on. The mansion's library, ironically, became my sanctuary. Amid leather-bound shelves, I found non-judgmental companions: Dickens, Austen, Steinbeck. I learned there were worlds beyond glitzy parties and my mother's critical stares. There, a person's value wasn't measured by luxury cars or society pages. While Olivia was sent to dance, singing, and etiquette classes, I sat quietly in the library, taking notes and dreaming of a life without comparisons. But it was there I made a silent vow. One day, I'd stand on my own, not because of Carter on a business card. Of course, vowing is one thing, living in reality is another. My reality was dinner parties where guests praised Olivia's charm, while I was introduced with a tepid, "This is Emily, our eldest. She does well in school." Period. That introduction felt like an unnecessary parenthesis in a long sentence. Sometimes I wondered, was I born at the wrong time? If Olivia came first, would I have been the pampered youngest? Or was the issue not birth order, but that I didn't fit the script my parents had written? I didn't want to star in the Carter brand's performance. I just wanted to be me. One night, I overheard my parents talking. My father said, "Emily's smart but hard to leverage, too independent." My mother sighed. She doesn't understand that in this world, it's not about being good, it's about making an impression. I lay in the dark, my heart heavy as stone. To them, I wasn't a daughter, but a failed project. That pain, over time, dulled into a scar. I learned to mock myself. Each time Olivia was praised, I'd smile inwardly. Let the fireworks burst. I'll quietly count the stars. Perhaps that's how I didn't lose my mind in Beacon Hill's marble walls. As a teenager, I knew, to escape Olivia's shadow and my parents' cold disdain, I had to carve my own path. I threw myself into studying because it was the one place fairness existed. Grades didn't play favorites. I became valedictorian of my class, then my school. But even holding the gold plaque on stage, I saw my mother's eyes in the audience. Not proud, just worried. Worried I'd do something ungraceful in front of the guests. If you ask what that childhood left me, I'd say, a map dotted with red X's, places I never want to return to. But paradoxically, that map led me to where I am now, knowing exactly how I want to live differently. In the Beacon Hill mansion, I learned two opposing lessons. 1. Money and prestige can turn a home into a museum, displaying family-like artifacts. 2. Love and recognition are the only things that turn a building into a home. I never got the second from my parents, but that absence planted in me a hunger to find it myself. Perhaps that's why, years later, when I met Daniel in his plumber's uniform, I instantly recognized he had something the entire Beacon Hill mansion never did: sincerity. If there's one keyword for my teenage years, it's comparison. In the Carter house, I was never Emily. I was only not Olivia. And believe me, nothing is more exhausting than running a race you never signed up for. The hook of this memory is vivid: a report card. I still remember the first time I brought home a perfect A report card. I was 10, eagerly handing the paper to my father, thinking this time he'd smile for real. He looked up from his laptop, nodded as if I'd reported stable stock indices. "Good," he said. Period. No hug, no praise. I stood there, waiting for something more. All I got was the clack of his keyboard resuming. Days later, Olivia brought home a report card with B's and C's in red. My parents treated it like a trophy. She tried her best. My mother took her shopping for a new dress. My father generously treated us all to ice cream. I sat in the corner, licking sour yogurt, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. So trying your best was worth more than doing well. Or rather, my success was never enough, while Olivia's mediocrity was always inflated into achievement. As I grew, I saw the unwritten rule clearly. If I won a debate, my mother corrected my posture instead of congratulating me. If Olivia told a dull story at dinner, the table erupted in laughter. If I earned a summer scholarship, my father warned me not to brag. If Olivia posted a photo by a piano, relatives commented, "Genius." That's when I understood. In the Carter house, favoritism wasn't an accident. It was a long-term policy, executed as smoothly as a business. The peak of this disparity came on our 16th birthdays. For some families, 16 is a sweet milestone, with cake and celebration. For me, it was the most painful lesson. My birthday was in March. That day, my mother handed me a $50 envelope and a pre-printed happy birthday card. The signature was scribbled, like a rushed contract approval. My father said, "You know saving is important." Then he returned to his desk. I told myself, at least there's an envelope, at least they remembered. But it was hard to feel grateful when dinner was just frozen pizza, not a single candle in sight. 3 months later, Olivia turned 16. That day was like a national festival. A white BMW appeared in the driveway, topped with a red bow so big, I'm surprised it didn't block the windshield. My father declared loudly, "Our princess needs a car to network, build relationships." Guests clapped. My mother wiped proud tears. Olivia squealed, hugging my father, while I stood by my second-floor window, holding an economics book I'd been reading. To them, I was the girl who only needed a library, while Olivia needed a car. That night, as Olivia drove around the block with music blaring, I sat on my bed, reopening the happy birthday card I'd tossed in a drawer. I searched for a trace of affection in the hasty scrawl but found only emptiness. For the first time I thought, maybe I'll never be enough, never the priority, because they never saw me as worth investing in. That mindset followed me like a shadow. I lived with two selves, one Emily who studied hard, earned high grades, tried to be recognized, and another Emily, bitter, laughing wryly each time Olivia was praised for breathing correctly. Someone asked why I didn't rebel. I did. I once cried in front of my mother asking, "What did I do wrong to never be praised?" She put a hand on my shoulder, sighing like a weary saint. "Emily, you're too serious. You need to learn to be charming like your sister." In other words, my fault was not being Olivia. Later, looking back, I saw it was a cruel game. My parents put Olivia on a pedestal, while I was the backdrop to highlight her shrine. If Olivia failed, it was a chance for family encouragement. If I succeeded, it was just expected. The rule was simple and brutal. One was always lifted, the other always diminished. Some nights I lay awake wondering what if I stopped trying. But the stubborn part of me whispered, "Keep going, if not for them, for yourself." I kept studying, kept topping my class, kept collecting small achievements. I didn't need fireworks, just enough light to guide me out of Beacon Hill. If you've ever been in that position, trying your hardest yet overshadowed, you know how it feels, wanting to be seen, yet wanting to disappear, a painful paradox. I think those experiences taught me to use sarcasm to survive. Each time Olivia was celebrated, I'd think, let them applaud, I'll write the script in silence. And indeed, that silence became my weapon. It taught me to observe, analyze, and recognize patterns of injustice. By now, I realized a truth. In the Carter house, love was never distributed fairly. It was like a secret budget, all allocated to Olivia while I got the scraps. Once I understood that was the rule, I stopped waiting for miracles. I only waited for the day I'd be strong enough to leave. That 16th birthday was a milestone, not because of the BMW or the $50 card, but because I understood. No effort would change how my parents saw me. I'd always be the daughter who was never enough, and if I wasn't enough for them, I'd learn to be enough for myself. Dear friend, have you ever felt like me, trying your hardest, yet overlooked? If this story resonates, comment ye. If you think it's nothing special, be honest and comment N. I want to know if my journey touches you. They say college is the start of a new life. For me, it wasn't a start, it was a survival test. I earned a full scholarship to Boston University, an achievement most parents would celebrate with a party. But in the Carter house, my father's response was a single sentence. "Good, but you should still take out loans to learn responsibility." It sounded like an educational philosophy, but it felt like he wanted to ensure I never forgot I was in debt. My mother was gentler, but no less bitter. "You need to understand the value of money. We can't pay for both you and your sister." What she didn't say, but I knew too well, was that Olivia, my sister, was never made to learn that lesson. If you want to understand more about Olivia and why she was always pampered, check out my earlier videos on the channel where I detail the BMW with the red bow and the blatant favoritism. Trust me, when you hear them, the contrast in this chapter will sting even more. The day I moved into Boston University's dorm with one suitcase and 2 cartons of books. Olivia posted a photo on Instagram from a luxurious Manhattan apartment, captioned, "Ready to start my NYU journey. Thanks, Daddy, #New York Life." That apartment, of course, was paid for by my father, along with a daddy account. A hefty bank account Olivia could spend freely on. Rent, tuition, designer clothes, lavish vacations flooding social media, all covered by my father's signature. And me? I walked into the campus bookstore to start my part-time job. My first shift began at 7 a.m., even though my classes ran late into the evening. I stacked books, dreaming of a budget dinner, ramen cooked in an electric kettle in my room. Sometimes I wondered, did my parents want me to fail? Or did they believe struggling would make me more grateful? But the truth was, every dollar I earned didn't make me grateful to them. It made me grateful to myself. That first semester, I worked 20 hours a week. On weekends, I picked up shifts at a nearby cafe. When my old laptop broke, I didn't dare call home for money. I saved for 3 months, balancing work and study, to buy a new one. Meanwhile, Olivia only had to say at dinner, "My laptop's too slow." And the next day, my father ordered a top-tier MacBook Pro, shipped straight to her apartment. My mother even said, "Your sister's studying marketing. She needs a powerful machine for design and presentations. You just read numbers." I stayed silent, but inside a bitter laugh erupted. So reading numbers doesn't need a computer? Should I use an abacus? But oddly, the unfairness didn't weaken me. It toughened me. Each night I returned to my dorm, collapsing at my desk, I whispered, "Emily, you'll get out of this." I dove into my studies. I maintained a 4.0 GPA for 4 years. I applied for internships at mid-sized financial firms. I built my path step by step, as if the ground beneath me was always a step away from a chasm. Olivia was different. She lived the role of Manhattan princess. Vacations in Cancun, glamorous parties, designer dresses swapped out constantly. At holiday dinners, the conversation revolved around Olivia, her new boyfriend, her fashion project, her dazzling parties. I sat nearby, asked perfunctorily, "How's the library job?" One memory I'll never forget is a winter during my sophomore year. I'd just finished a long shift at the cafe, my hands still smelling of coffee. I got home to see Olivia live streaming a lavish birthday party, lights twinkling, friends cheering. My parents sat in the middle, smiling brightly, raising glasses in a toast. I stared at the screen, seeing the stark contrast. I was the laborer in my own story, while Olivia was the star on their stage. That night, I didn't cry. I sat down and wrote a list. 1. Achieve financial independence. 2. Build my own career. 3. Never become Olivia's shadow. That list became my compass through college. If you've ever had to carry everything yourself while your sibling was handed a red carpet, you might understand the feeling I'm describing. It's like running a marathon on sand while others cruise by on golf carts, still getting applause. But I realized something. Independence isn't just a burden, it's a privilege. In those exhausting shifts, I learned endurance. In the months of pinching pennies, I learned the value of labor. And in my parents' indifferent glances, I learned a truth. Real worth isn't in others' eyes, but in how you see yourself in the mirror. On graduation day, I stood on stage, receiving my summa cum laude degree. The auditorium clapped, but the seats reserved for my parents were empty. They had to attend a charity gala, of course. Before leaving, my father said, "We've heard your speech rehearsal. No need to hear it again." I looked around, seeing only Lisa, my best friend, clapping until her hands were red. I smiled at her, telling myself, sometimes family isn't blood, but the ones by your side in the most important moments. After graduation, I landed a job at a mid-tier financial consulting firm in Cambridge. I rented a small apartment, furnishing it with my first paychecks. Each chair, each bowl, each wall hanging bore the mark of my sweat. No red bows, no parents cutting a ribbon. But I had built my own life, And from that moment, I knew, if I didn't stand on my own, I'd forever be a shadow in the Beacon Hill mansion. I chose the harder path, but at least it was mine. Have you ever walked into an empty room and felt it like a blank page, waiting for you to write your own story? I felt that the day I got the keys to my small Cambridge apartment. The apartment was on the third floor of an old red brick building with creaky wooden stairs. No grand lobby, no uniformed doorman, just an elderly neighbor sitting in the hallway playing Sudoku. But when the door opened, the room flooded with light from a window overlooking a cobblestone street. I stood still, taking a deep breath, feeling like I'd found a safe space, entirely separate from the Beacon Hill mansion's half-hearted laughter and judgmental stares. On moving day, my belongings were minimal. A second-hand Craigslist bed, a small wooden table, and a few cartons of books and clothes. No red bow like Olivia's BMW, no movers hired by my parents. I carried each box myself, sweat soaking my shirt, but each step up the stairs was a step of affirmation. This is my life, not handed to me. That night, I sat on the floor eating cold pizza from a paper box, surrounded by unopened cartons. To an outsider, it might look pitiful, but to me, it was my first independence party. I raised a soda can instead of champagne, laughing to myself. Congrats, Emily, you've escaped the supporting role. Each item I gradually added to the apartment held meaning. The small oak coffee table, 3 weeks of overtime at the consulting firm. The plain white dish set, a gift to myself after landing my first client deal. Even the teal rug in the living room reminded me of nights spent crunching numbers until 2 a.m., promising myself I'd buy it if I finished a report on time. In that apartment, nothing came from Carter Properties. No show-off gifts. Everything was from my own effort. And each time I stepped inside, I saw a truth. Freedom and self-respect can be bought, but with your own sweat, not someone else's credit card. I still visited the Beacon Hill mansion for obligatory holidays. The same lavish parties, the same eyes fixed on Olivia, now the NYU star. I sat quietly in a corner, hearing my father introduce. "This is Olivia, our charming youngest." Then he turned to me, adding as an afterthought, "Emily has a stable job." Those two words, stable job, boxed me into a bland label. Each time I returned to my small apartment, I breathed a sigh of relief. Here, no one compared, no unwritten rules. I could play jazz, read late into the night, or eat ramen on the couch without my mother scolding me for lacking grace. In that tiny apartment, I finally felt alive. Once Olivia visited, or rather dropped by while shopping. She stood in my living room, looking around with a frown. "You live like this? So small, nothing fancy." I smiled, handing her a hot tea. "Yeah, small, but everything here I bought with my own money. Isn't that more interesting?" She laughed as if it were a joke. I couldn't stand it. Her words made me realize the biggest difference between us wasn't just how our parents treated us, but how we defined happiness. For Olivia, happiness needed camera flashes, red bows, and applause. For me, happiness was the sound of the kettle whistling, signaling a peaceful evening. You might wonder, did I ever feel envious comparing my modest apartment to Olivia's flashy penthouse on social media? Honestly, yes. I'd see her photos, cocktails on rooftops, designer dresses, sparkling captions, and think, what if? But then I'd recall the feeling of walking into my home. No judgment, no control. And I realized, sometimes freedom is the most luxurious commodity. I spent many nights alone reflecting on my parents. Did they ever truly see me, or only the not Olivia version? I tried to forgive, but bitterness crept in. I told myself, if they don't value me, I'll learn to value myself twice as much. In those moments, I'd sit by the window, watching Cambridge's city lights twinkle. Each glowing window was a story, a separate life. I promised myself, one day, my life won't just be a shadow in the Carter family tree. It will be a story big enough to tell on its own. Then one April evening, while working on a report, I heard dripping. I thought it was a loose faucet. But minutes later, the floor was cold and wet under my feet, water gushing from the bathroom, spreading like a wild beast escaping its cage. My hands trembled as I dialed the emergency number on the flyer behind my door. Wilson Plumbing, 24/7 service. The operator promised, someone will be there within the hour. I sat curled up on a chair, listening to the water's relentless trickle, my palms ice cold. I didn't know that call would change my life forever. There are nights when you think a hot tea and a book are enough to end the day peacefully, but life doesn't like letting me rest. That April night, Cambridge was drenched in rain, and in my small apartment, a pipe decided to turn into a mini Niagara Falls. It started with a dull pop from the bathroom, followed by water spraying like a fire hose. The floor flooded so fast my slippers floated like toy boats. I frantically twisted the main valve, but it was as stubborn as Olivia during math homework. It wouldn't budge. I stood in the deluge, hair soaked, thinking, here it is, the next chapter of the overlooked Carter life, drowning, literally. In a panic, I grabbed the flyer behind the door. Wilson Plumbing, 24/7 service. I called. The woman on the line sounded like a night shift angel. Someone will be there in an hour. I sighed, though skeptical. An hour? At this rate, my apartment would be an Olympic pool. I sat shivering on the sofa, jeans soaked, clutching a pillow like a life raft. Outside, thunder rumbled. I worried about the water and the bill. With my mid-tier financial consultant salary, an emergency plumber would cost half a month's groceries. But in this flood, I had no choice. 53 minutes later, a knock. I opened the door to a tall man in a dark green polo with Wilson Plumbing embroidered, carrying a massive toolbox. He smiled, a strange smile that seemed to calm the rain outside. Heard your place is turning into a pool? My first impression of Daniel Miller? I'll never forget it. His brown eyes had a mix of resolve and warmth, the kind that made you believe everything would be okay, even in chaos. He stepped in, checked the pipes, and swiftly shut off a secondary valve I didn't know existed. The water stopped, silent, leaving only the sound of rain outside. I nearly hugged him right there, but remembered I was drenched. You're lucky, he said, grinning. If you hadn't called, we'd be kayaking in your living room soon. His light Boston accent made me laugh, half embarrassed, half relieved. I'd always pictured plumbers as disheveled, but Daniel was different. Tidy, clean, and most importantly, he didn't sneer at my modest apartment, a courtesy even my parents rarely offered. As he replaced the broken pipe, I watched. His hands were strong, movements precise. I caught myself staring too long, then turned away, pretending to organize books on the shelf. But Daniel broke the silence. What do you do? Don't tell me you're a plumber too, or I'm out of a job. I laughed. Financial consultant. Nothing to do with pipes, except hoping my cash flow doesn't leak like this. He looked up, eyes bright with interest. Finance, huh? That's cool. What do you think about the new interest rate policy? I froze. I was used to people changing the subject when I mentioned my job. But Daniel didn't just ask for show. He listened, countered, even cited an example from a book I'd read the previous week. When I mentioned Schumpeter, he nodded. Creative destruction fits new tech perfectly. I blurted, You read Schumpeter too? He grinned. I read a lot, not just plumbing manuals. In that moment, I forgot my dripping hair. We talked for 3 hours, long after the pipe was fixed. We discussed books, history, how Boston had changed. I was surprised to learn he played chess, even competed at the state level. A plumber who loved chess and Schumpeter? If I told my mother, she'd laugh dismissively. But that surprise drew me in. Before leaving, he handed me his card. If the pipes rebel again, call me. Or, if you want to keep debating world economics. He smiled. I took the card, feeling a stir in my chest. Something new, unlike anything I'd felt with the eligible bachelors my parents had introduced. That night, after closing the door, I sat on the sofa, staring at the card under the lamp. Daniel Miller, Wilson Plumbing. I smiled. Who knew my life's turning point would start with a burst pipe? I thought back to the Beacon Hill mansion, where people discussed honor, status, and million-dollar deals. There, no one had ever truly listened to me. But in my flooded apartment, a humble plumber saw me as if every word I said mattered. I realized, sometimes, fate doesn't knock with a luxury car or a gala. It knocks with oil-stained hands, a warm smile, and a timely pipe repair. It might have started with a cup of coffee. Not the artistic cappuccino with heart-shaped foam Olivia flaunted on Instagram, but a bitter black coffee in a corner cafe where the door chime jingled with each customer and the air smelled of slightly burnt waffles. Daniel asked me to meet there on a Saturday afternoon. I meant it as a thank you follow-up, but the conversation stretched 4 hours. We talked about history, music, books. He recounted a chess match he lost in a state final, and I confessed to reading classic novels instead of attending cocktail parties. What surprised me wasn't our common ground, but Daniel's eyes. He looked at me like every word I said mattered, not like a footnote in Olivia's drama. Our later dates were just as simple. One day, we visited a used bookstore tucked behind Harvard Square. The place was cramped, shelves towering to the ceiling, dust floating in golden light. I pulled out a worn novel. Daniel grabbed a book on electronics. We swapped, laughing when we found we both underlined favorite passages. In that moment, I thought, dating doesn't need diamonds or tuxedos, just two souls meeting on a page. Another evening, we walked along the Charles River. The city lit up, the water reflecting light like 1,000 shattered mirrors. Daniel shared stories of his Rhode Island childhood. I told him about cold Beacon Hill evenings, where food was plentiful but affection scarce. He listened without interrupting with empty advice. When I paused, he gently took my hand, a grip that said more than 1,000 words. I understand. The peak of simplicity was probably his first visit to my apartment. I fumbled through making dinner. Tomato pasta and a simple salad. I worried he'd be disappointed, haunted by memories of my family's lavish dinners with private chefs. But Daniel ate heartily, praising, "This pasta beats North End's Italian restaurants." I laughed. "You're just saying that to get invited back," he winked. "Exactly." After dinner, we washed dishes together. He dried, I washed. A mundane scene, but to me, it meant everything. Growing up, I never saw my parents do a simple task together. Everything was outsourced, from maids to butlers. Turns out, happiness isn't always at a gilded table, but at a sink shared by two. The contrast grew clearer. The Carter world was galas, overflowing champagne towers, rehearsed smiles. My world with Daniel was bitter coffee, old books, homemade pasta, and windswept river walks. I'd lived too long in a world where everything was priced by money and fame. With Daniel, I learned to price things by real emotion. Of course, I still worried. What would my parents say if they knew I was dating a plumber? They'd probably sneer. Emily's finally found someone at her level. The thought made me angry and sad. But when I saw Daniel smile, I saw something I never found in my parents' eyes: respect. Once he surprised me with a trip to the Science Museum. He explained the exhibits with enthusiasm, eyes sparkling like a child's. I was amazed. "You know so much." He just laughed. "I'm just curious. Curiosity's the only way the world stays interesting." I fell silent. Curiosity, something my parents always deemed a waste of time, since all answers belonged in financial reports. I realized, with Daniel, I didn't need to play a role. No need to be charming, no need to prove I was worthy. I could be Emily, the book lover, the debater, sometimes clumsy, sometimes sharp. And he stayed, listening, smiling. One night, walking me home, he stopped at my door and said earnestly, "I don't have a penthouse or a fancy car, but I can promise one thing. I'll always see you, even when the world turns away." I was silent, tears welling. No one, not even my parents, had ever promised that. Perhaps that simplicity moved me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Not a spotlight, but a candle's flicker, enough to warm a room. And sometimes, that candle is what keeps you through the winter. Have you ever felt it? Being heard, seen, not because you're perfect, but because you're you? If so, you understand why I began to believe Daniel wasn't just the plumber who fixed my flooded apartment on a rainy night, but perhaps the destiny I'd been waiting for. And then, I knew it was time to test this love by bringing Daniel into the Carter world, a world where the word plumber alone was enough to draw scornful glances. What happened next, you'll see in Chapter 8, The Fateful Carter Family Dinner. They say family dinners bring people together. For me, every visit to the Beacon Hill mansion felt like attending a trial, my parents as judges, Olivia as the star witness, and me as the defendant, always proving my worth. That day, I decided to bring Daniel to meet them. Maybe I was naive, thinking if they saw him, his calm, intelligence, kindness, they'd change. I convinced myself they just needed a chance to understand. But stepping into the dining room with its pristine white tablecloth and gleaming silverware, I knew I'd thrown the man I loved into a lion's den. My father, Richard Carter, stood to shake Daniel's hand. But instead of a normal handshake, he gripped hard, eyeing him head to toe, as if appraising a property. "So, what do you do?" he asked, voice indifferent. "I'm a plumber, sir," Daniel replied, calm and steady. The silence that followed was so heavy, I heard the faint clink of cutlery on plates. My mother raised an eyebrow, then regained her composure. "Oh, how interesting. And where did you two meet?" I explained the pipe incident. My mother glanced at my father, their quick exchange like a stock market ticker. "Our daughter's really dating a plumber?" Olivia arrived just then in a striking red silk dress beside Bradley, her new boyfriend, heir to a luxury hotel chain. She didn't need an introduction. My parents took care of it. "This is Bradley, Harvard MBA, currently managing expansion projects in Europe," my father announced, voice brimming with pride, like unveiling a new deal. The dinner revolved around Olivia and Bradley. They talked about Paris trips, Rome parties, plans for a Swiss resort. My mother smiled brightly, occasionally turning to me with a perfunctory, "Emily, your job? Still going well?" The question felt like the last bullet point on a to-do list. Daniel sat there, polite and patient. He asked about my father's company, complimented my mother's cooking. But each time he spoke, my father deftly cut him off. "Oh, Olivia, tell us more about the Monaco party." I bit my lip, my heart stinging. Not because Daniel was disrespected, but because I realized my parents never gave me a chance either. The climax came when Bradley raised his glass, praising the Carter class. My father clapped his shoulder. "Exactly. We always maintain standards. Choosing a partner reflects that." His glance slid to me and Daniel, brief, but enough for me to understand. He saw me as proof of failure. In that moment, I wanted to scream. Wanted to tell the table that Daniel was smarter than Bradley, more genuine than any high society man they'd ever praised. But I stayed silent, knowing my words would be filed under useless excuses. As dinner ended, Olivia pulled me to the balcony, whispering, "Do you really think Daniel fits our family? I'm not judging him, but a plumber, Emily." Her words were soft, but the knife was sharp. I looked at my sister, a familiar bitterness rising. In the Carter world, a job wasn't just a livelihood, it was a measure of worth. And if it wasn't glamorous, it was automatically lesser. Daniel stepped out, sensing the tension. He placed a hand on my back, saying gently, "I'm fine." But I knew no one could be fully fine when treated as invisible at their partner's family dinner. On the drive home, I kept apologizing. I didn't expect them to be like that. He smiled softly, taking my hand. "Emily, you don't need to apologize for them. You can't control their gaze. What you can control is how you see yourself." I fell silent, tears welling. Because in that moment, I understood. I'd spent my youth chasing my parents' approval, but they never intended to give it. Have you ever been at a dinner where instead of being welcomed, you and your loved one felt like outsiders? If so, you'd understand how I felt that night. The pain wasn't from overt words, but from indifference wrapped in perfect etiquette. And I knew, after that evening, the real battle was just beginning. Because Daniel wasn't just the man I loved. He was the mirror reflecting my true worth, a worth the Carter family never accepted. Some secrets are like locked rooms. You know they exist, But you don't expect the world to turn upside down when the door opens. For Daniel, that door opened one Saturday afternoon when he invited me to his Somerville apartment. I'd imagined a plumber's home, old chairs, stained walls, tools scattered, but stepping inside, I was almost stunned. The apartment was bright, tidy, more like a Harvard Library reading room than a typical home. A bookshelf spanned an entire wall, packed with novels, history books, and most surprising, thick technical manuals. Daniel was preparing dinner in the kitchen, while I curiously approached his desk. It was littered with complex drawings, full of symbols and numbers I'd never seen. There was a folder labeled Aqua Pure Systems Confidential. I frowned, touching a page. Pipe schematics, but paired with unfamiliar electronic devices, like technology far beyond standard plumbing. Find something interesting? Daniel appeared behind me, holding 2 glasses of wine. I startled, stammering. These drawings, they don't look like regular plumbing tools. He smiled, set the glasses down, and sat across from me. You're right. They're not for fixing pipes. They're for changing how an entire city uses water. I stared, wide-eyed. He took a deep breath, then spoke slowly. Guess it's time I told you everything. I didn't start my career with pipes. I graduated from MIT electrical engineering, worked 6 years at Talbot Technologies, leading a team researching energy systems for military applications. Good job, great pay, but it drained me, pulled me away from what mattered. When my dad got sick, I quit to help with the family plumbing business. And surprisingly, I loved it. The feeling of solving a real problem, helping a family not flood in a storm. I sat stunned. Part of me was shocked. The man my parents scorned as a common plumber had led a research team at a top tech firm. Another part was confused. Why hadn't he told me? As if reading my mind, Daniel said earnestly, I didn't hide it out of shame. I hid it to be sure you loved me. Daniel, the person, not the MIT engineer or startup founder. You know how people often see degrees or titles before the real person. I sat silent, emotions swirling. I thought of my parents, who only saw me through the lens of achievements and comparisons. And now here was a man who deliberately shed his titles to be seen unconditionally. What's Aqua Pure Systems? I asked softly. He handed me the folder. A smart water-saving system. Cuts household water use by 60% without changing habits. I've tested prototypes in a few homes. Feedback's so good I filed for a patent last month. 3 venture capital firms are in talks with me. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages. Charts, stats, business plans, all clear, detailed. This wasn't a pipe dream, it was a revolution in the water industry. I looked at him. Why not tell my parents? At least they'd stop looking down on you. He shook his head, eyes firm. Emily, I don't need their approval. And I definitely don't want to be their gala trophy. If they can't respect me thinking I'm just a plumber, they don't deserve the glory when they learn I'm a CEO. His words pierced my heart. All my life, I'd tried to prove I was enough to my parents. Daniel refused that game entirely. He didn't seek applause, he sought truth. We ate dinner in his small kitchen. I barely tasted the pasta, my mind reeling. I thought of Olivia and Bradley, the fake smiles around the dinner table. And now, here was a man ready to live authentically. No titles needed for validation. I felt both relieved and afraid. Relieved to find a love my parents never gave. Afraid because when this truth came out, the Carter family wouldn't take it lightly. After dinner, Daniel walked me through the streets. The air was cool, maple leaves rustling. He stopped, looking at me intently. I have one question. Do you regret loving a plumber? Even if I could be more. I laughed, tears welling. If you were just the guy handing me tissues when I cry, I wouldn't regret it. He hugged me tightly. And for the first time in years, I felt sheltered. Not by Beacon Hill's stone walls, but by a person's arms. Have you ever loved someone so much that their past, degrees, or status became irrelevant? That night, my answer was clear. I loved Daniel not for MIT, not for Aquapure, but for how he made me feel, that I was enough, even when my family said otherwise. But deep down, I knew the secret door had opened, and it couldn't be closed. One day, my parents would learn the truth, and when they did, everything would turn upside down, not just for them, but for me. There are moments in life when you realize you're just a supporting actor in a play your parents scripted. For me, that moment was when Olivia walked into her engagement party with Bradley, and the room exploded in applause. The party was held in the grand ballroom of a five-star Boston hotel. Crystal chandeliers dazzled, champagne flowed in towers, a string quartet played classical music. Over 200 guests, business tycoons, politicians, in-crowd friends were there. I stood in a corner, holding a soda, trying to be invisible. In that atmosphere, I saw how happy my parents were. My father's eyes lit up introducing Bradley, my mother beaming as she showed off Olivia's 4-carat diamond ring. I wanted to believe it was just normal parental joy at their daughter finding a partner. But the truth was more bitter. That joy wasn't for me. The moment that took my breath away was when my father raised his glass, his voice booming across the room. For Olivia, our charming youngest, nothing is too much. Carter Properties is proud to spend $300,000 on our darling's wedding. We'll host a ceremony worthy of her, a gift to start her new chapter. Applause, cheers, clinking glasses filled the air. I stood frozen, my hand trembling, trying not to drop my soda. $300,000. The number echoed in my head like a funeral bell for my last hopes of fairness. I didn't need that money. I just needed acknowledgement. But even that had never existed. Comparison is cruel. While Olivia was promised $1 million wedding, Daniel and I got a tepid nod from my parents. "Oh, congratulations," my mother said, eyes glued to her phone. No party, no flowers, no toasts. I thought they'd at least host a family dinner to mark it. But no, they treated my engagement like a bill to be signed quickly. It hurt, but strangely I didn't collapse. Because beside me was Daniel. He didn't show resentment or jealousy. At Olivia's lavish party, as all eyes turned to the golden couple, he just squeezed my hand, as if saying, "We don't need spotlights to know we belong." After my father announced the $300,000, I stepped onto the balcony to breathe. Boston's night air was frigid, but kinder than the ballroom's glaring lights. Daniel followed, draping his jacket over my shoulders. I looked at him, whispering, "I hate this. Hate feeling I'm never enough in their eyes." He smiled softly. "Emily, in their eyes, you might not be enough. But in mine, you're more than enough. More than enough courage, wit, and heart." His simple words held back my tears. Back in the ballroom, Olivia shone like a queen. Was she truly happy, or just playing the part? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing. I didn't want my happiness priced by the money my father flaunted to a crowd. I wanted it defined by how Daniel looked at me, like I was the most precious thing he'd ever seen. I knew this choice meant accepting loneliness within my own family. But I also knew, if I kept chasing my parents' approval, I'd lose myself. As the party ended, Olivia and Bradley left in a luxury car amid cheers. Daniel and I quietly took a taxi back to my Cambridge apartment. On the way, I wondered, will they ever see who Daniel really is? Or will they always see him as just a plumber? The answer wasn't clear, but a resolute flame sparked in me. I wouldn't let my parents define the value of my love. They say the day before a wedding, every bride is nervous. But my nerves weren't about the dress fitting, the flowers staying fresh, or guests showing up. My nerves came from my parents still not confirming they'd attend. That morning, I sat by my Cambridge apartment window, phone cold in my hand. I called my mother. The line rang long, then her voice came, calm as if discussing dinner plans. "Hello?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I just want to confirm. Tomorrow, I'm getting married. 4 p.m., Riverside Garden. Daniel and I really hope you and Dad will be there." A pause. I heard a glass clink on a table, then her sigh. "Emily, we won't embarrass ourselves. It's your choice." Her words hit like a sledgehammer. "We won't embarrass ourselves. That was your choice." I froze. So in my mother's eyes, my wedding wasn't a milestone, but an embarrassment to avoid. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I'm marrying the man I love. Is love really so shameful? She cut me off, voice icy. Emily, you made your choice. Now live with the consequences. The line went dead. I sat still, the phone slipping to my lap. The room felt empty, like all the air had been sucked out. I wasn't a bride anymore, but a 6-year-old holding a perfect report card, pushed aside for her sister's ice cream and new dress. Daniel walked in, seeing my pale face. He sat down quickly. What's wrong? I choked out. They're not coming. They said marrying you embarrasses them. Silence enveloped us. I waited for Daniel to get angry, to feel hurt by the insult, but he just looked at me, his eyes gentler than any comfort. He took my hand, voice firm. Emily, listen. Tomorrow isn't their day. It's ours. This wedding isn't to prove anything to your parents. It's to start our life together. I cried, but the tears mixed with relief. In that moment, I realized Daniel was my family, even if blood turned its back. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I kept thinking, should I send one more text? Beg them one last time? But then I remembered Daniel's words. Tomorrow is our day. And I knew it was time to stop waiting for miracles from people who never gave me a chance. The next morning, sunlight through the curtains woke me with an odd calm. Lisa, my childhood best friend, arrived early with the wedding flowers. She looked at me, sighing. I wish you didn't have to think about them today. I smiled faintly. Me too. But maybe this is their final gift. Their absence, so I know what truly matters. Uncle Henry called, his voice warm. My girl, I'll come pick you up. Don't worry, you'll never walk alone. My heart lightened a bit. In the cold Carter darkness, there was still one light. That afternoon, Daniel texted, I'm ready. Just show up, and everything will be perfect. I read it over and over, feeling faith rise. Yes, as long as we have each other. Yet my mother's words lingered. We won't embarrass ourselves. I wondered, how had I lived all these years to make my parents think my existence was shameful? But as that thought surged, I recalled Daniel's eyes yesterday, eyes with no doubt about my worth, and I told myself, if they can't see me, Daniel seeing me is enough. As the afternoon waned, I tried on my wedding dress one last time. White lace hugged my frame, the veil flowing softly, not as extravagant as Olivia's, but to me, perfect. Lisa fixed my hair, whispering, You know, not everyone could marry without their parents there, but you can, because you're stronger than you think. I looked in the mirror, seeing a different Emily. Not the daughter seeking approval, but a woman ready to write her own chapter. They say, Is your wedding day like your dreams? For me, it wasn't like any dream. It was a blank page I had to rewrite from scratch. No parents' signatures at the bottom, but my and Daniel's heart signatures. Riverside Garden that day wore a gentle summer coat. Golden sunlight stretched across the grass, a light breeze swaying white ribbons. No fireworks, no grand orchestra, no 200 guests like Olivia's party. Just about 40 close friends, a few colleagues, and notably, Uncle Henry, the only Carter who came. I remember the moment he entered the bride's room, tie neatly knotted, eyes kind. My girl, he offered his arm. Let your uncle stand in for my brother. I bit my lip, holding back tears, then nodded. His hand wasn't commanding like my father's, but steady with the support of someone who chose my side. The music played. I took Uncle Henry's arm and stepped onto the aisle. Daniel stood at the end in a deep blue suit, his eyes shining like they held the universe. The seats for my parents were empty in the front row, like stubborn creases in a happy picture. I glanced at them, then turned to Daniel. If they chose absence, I chose presence. Walking the flower-strewn aisle, I heard the breeze, the soft murmurs of friends, and my own heartbeat. I no longer felt like the child forgotten in the Beacon Hill mansion. I was the bride of my own life. The ceremony was simple. Lisa's speech made both Daniel and me laugh through tears. A colleague sang a love song, voice unpolished but heartfelt. When we exchanged vows, I saw in Daniel's eyes not just love, but a promise. I see you, completely. We exchanged rings, our kiss met with applause. I looked up, seeing sunlight through the trees like a private blessing. The reception was small and sweet. The two-tier cake was sweeter than anything I'd tasted at lavish galas. Guests toasted not for fame, but for real joy. I laughed until my cheeks ached, feeling lighter, as if tons of weight had lifted from my shoulders. But the real climax came later. After most guests left, only Daniel, me, and a few close friends remained. In the small tent, a white banner hung with green letters. Congratulations, Daniel Miller, CEO of Aquapure Systems. Daniel's friends had planned this surprise, knowing the truth he hadn't shared. I stood staring at the banner, heart pounding. This was the moment my parents never imagined. The man they scorned as a plumber was the CEO of a clean water tech company about to raise millions. A bold idea struck. I asked Lisa to take a photo, Daniel and me under the banner, hand in hand, smiling brightly. No lavish gown, no grand castle, just pure happiness. I opened the family group chat, fingers trembling, and sent the photo with, "Thought you might want to see what you missed." After hitting send, my heart raced like I'd committed a crime. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up. A call from my mother. I ignored it. A text from my father. "Emily, call back now. We need to talk." Then 10 missed calls, 20. I looked, smiling faintly. All my life I waited for their calls, and today, when they wouldn't stop, I didn't need them anymore. Daniel looked at me, slightly worried. "Want to hear them out?" I shook my head. "Not today. Today's our day." He nodded, squeezing my hand. In his eyes, there was no thirst for revenge, just faith. If I was strong enough to send that photo, I was strong enough to face the consequences. That evening, as I removed my veil, Lisa teased, "You just shook the Carter house with one tap." I laughed. "Maybe it's my biggest deal, signing my own happiness." The phone kept buzzing. Messages flooded. "Emily, we need to meet Daniel." Not telling us the truth from the start was disrespectful. "Don't let this go further." I skimmed them, then turned off the phone. I didn't want their panic to ruin the sweetest moment. Perhaps nothing is more bitter than those who once dismissed you suddenly knocking, not because they saw your worth, but because a newspaper did it for them. The headline on the Boston Business Journal's front page was like a knife flipping the board. Aquapure Systems secures $5 billion funding, wins Riverfront District project. The article featured Daniel shaking hands with an investor, alongside promising figures that would catch any real estate mogul's eye. My parents surely read it. And just days after skipping my wedding, I heard a knock at my Cambridge apartment. My mother stepped in first, holding a luxurious gift bag, her smile strained. My father followed, clutching an expensive champagne bottle, his tailored suit pristine as if preparing for a negotiation rather than visiting his daughter. "Emily, Daniel," my mother began, her voice syrupy enough to make my skin crawl, "we may have judged too hastily." I crossed my arms, leaning back in my chair. Judged what wrong? Calling my wedding an embarrassment? Or not bothering to show up? My father cleared his throat, dabbing sweat with a handkerchief. "We were too harsh. But what matters now is moving forward. Aquapure is an incredible achievement. I believe Carter Properties and Daniel's company could collaborate, especially on Riverfront." I laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but one bursting from years of being overlooked. "So that's why you're here, not to be parents, but to be partners." Daniel sat beside me, face calm. He wasn't angry or smug. He just said gently, "Richard, I appreciate the gesture. But let's be clear, Aquapure doesn't need a partnership to survive. We have Riverfront, and it's just the start." My father's eyes flickered with surprise. I'd never seen him lose composure in a deal, but Daniel's calm threw him off balance. My mother jumped in, voice pleading, "Emily, you have to understand. We only wanted the best for you. We were wrong, but let's move past it. Our family needs to unite." I looked straight into her eyes. "Mom, family doesn't unite just for profit. I needed you when I cried in the bride's room, when I hoped for a single congratulations. Where were you? At a gala with Olivia. Anywhere but with me." The air grew thick as smoke. My father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "If you really want to be parents, start by learning to love without conditions. Don't come for Aquapure. Don't come for Riverfront. Come for me. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, lending strength. He said, voice firm but polite, "This isn't a negotiation. This is family. And if you want to be part of ours, the rule is simple. Respect, real love, not titles or money." My father pursed his lips, silent for once. My mother's eyes glistened, but I couldn't tell if it was tears or a tactic. They stayed a few more minutes, exchanging empty words, then left. As the door closed, I leaned against the wall, exhaling. All my life I dreamed of them admitting fault. But when it came, I felt only emptiness. Their apology wasn't tied to their hearts, but to a contract. Daniel hugged me. "You okay?" I nodded, laughing bitterly. At least this time they had to knock on my door, not me chasing their approval. He smiled, kissing my forehead. "And you set a boundary. That's the real victory. Some castles fall in a blink, not in war documentaries, but in your own family, where Olivia once sat on a throne." The news broke on a Monday morning. I was sipping coffee when a red ticker flashed across the screen. FBI investigates Bradley Thompson for financial fraud, suspected of running Ponzi scheme through hotel chain. My coffee cup nearly slipped. Bradley, the golden son-in-law, the Carter pride, the man my father toasted as the dream son-in-law, was now in handcuffs. That evening, Olivia called. Her voice trembled, stripped of its usual haughtiness. "Emily, I have nowhere to go. Bradley's arrested, the apartment's sealed, accounts frozen. Her voice broke. I paused, then said, "Come here." Daniel wasn't surprised when I told him. He just nodded. Our doors always open, no matter the past. I saw the man I fell in love with. Calm, kind, shining without a spotlight. Olivia arrived with 2 small suitcases, eyes shadowed, clothes wrinkled. The woman who dazzled at every party now sat curled on my sofa, a lost child. I made hot tea, setting it before her. She burst into tears, whispering, "Emily, are you really happy with Daniel?" I glanced at my husband, washing dishes after dinner, whistling softly. A simple scene, warmer than any gala. I answered, "Yes. Happiness doesn't always come with fireworks, Olivia. Sometimes it's just laughter in a small kitchen." While Olivia struggled to rebuild, news about Carter Properties wasn't brighter. Bradley had dragged my father's company into shady deals. The luxurious projects once touted in papers were now under investigation. Partners fled, clients pulled funds. A week later, headlines blared. Carter Properties sells Beacon Hill mansion to cover debts and legal fees. I saw a photo of the familiar mansion, my childhood home, now empty with a for sale sign. I didn't cry. Strangely, instead of pain, I felt relief. Perhaps because that fortress of pride had finally paid its price. My mother called, voice hoarse, "Emily, everything's ruined. Your father's exhausted. We've lost it all." I closed my eyes, my heart heavy but no longer breaking. I replied briefly, "I'm sorry for you, but I warned you. Money and honor don't hold a family together." The days Olivia stayed were a lesson for her. She saw Daniel and me cooking together, sharing chores, planning. No one played star, no one proved themselves, just companionship. One evening, as I washed dishes, Olivia leaned against the door, saying softly, "Emily, I never thought family could be like this, truly peaceful." I smiled faintly. Maybe because we grew up in a house where love was replaced by report cards and luxury cars. She fell silent, eyes glistening. I knew for the first time Olivia saw real value. Not spotlights, but the caring gaze of those beside you. My parents were different. They were busy with lawyers, reporters, and former friends who turned away. They rarely called, maybe from shame, maybe from distraction. But I knew their silence was the inevitable result of their lifelong choice, prioritizing honor over family. They say time heals all wounds. I don't fully believe that. Time only reveals scars clearer. Some make you proud for surviving, others shame you for letting them linger too long. One summer afternoon, when my mother, Margaret Carter, stood on my porch, I saw her facing both kinds of scars. 3 years had passed since Daniel and I married. We had a small house in Cambridge's suburbs, with a backyard of lavender and a vegetable patch. More importantly, we had Lily, our 2-year-old daughter with curious brown eyes inherited from her father. That day, I was cleaning the kitchen when I heard giggles outside. I looked through the window. Daniel was bent down, holding a small watering can, guiding Lily to water a tomato plant. She fumbled, water splashing, but he laughed, patiently adjusting her hand. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart warm. Then I noticed another figure. My mother, Margaret, stood silently on the porch, clutching her purse, eyes fixed on the scene like she was spellbound. I opened the door, surprised. "Mom?" She startled, turning to me. Not the cold gaze I knew, but redrimmed eyes, voice trembling. "Emily, I'm sorry for coming unannounced. I just wanted to see you and Lily." Before I could respond, she covered her mouth, a sob escaping. I'd never seen her cry. My whole childhood she was an ice statue, elegant, perfect, never letting emotions crack. But today that statue melted on my doorstep. "I was wrong, Emily," she choked. "Wrong to value money over happiness. Wrong to miss the day you needed me most. Please, give me a chance to be a real grandmother." My heart tightened. Part of me wanted to laugh bitterly. "So, you finally admit it." But another part, the child still craving her hug, trembled. I remembered my wedding night, when she casually said I'd embarrass the family. The empty seats in the ceremony, the parties where Olivia was celebrated and I was forgotten. Those memories cut like glass. And now, I saw a woman pleading to re-enter her daughter's life. Daniel approached, carrying Lily. He said nothing, just set her down to toddle toward me. Then he stood beside my mother, looking at her calmly. A slight nod, no judgment, no rushed forgiveness, just a message. "It's Emily's call." I hugged Lily, feeling her warm breath. And I understood, forgiveness wasn't for the past, but for the future. I looked up, stepping toward my mother. "Mom," I whispered, "I can't forget what happened. But if you truly want to be a grandmother, start today." She burst into tears, hugging me tightly. That trembling embrace was late, but it was the one I'd waited for my whole life. We sat on the porch. Daniel poured tea. Lily played with a plastic cup. My mother said after Carter Properties' collapse, she and my father sold the Beacon Hill mansion. They moved to a small apartment, no maids, no galas. At first it felt like the end, she sighed. But then I realized we lost everything except what we should have kept, family. I listened, torn between empathy and caution. Was this another act to salvage image? But seeing her weary face, her tired eyes, I believed it was real. With honor gone, only family remained to cling to. That afternoon, my mother played with Lily in the garden. My daughter giggled as she chased her. The sight made me tear up. Perhaps sometimes ruin is needed to rebuild. Without those years of collapse, how could I see my mother, the woman who once prized honor above all, now picking up toys for her granddaughter? Dear friend, have you ever wished a loved one you resented would return and admit their wrongs? If so, you'd understand my feeling. Doubt mixed with a desire to believe. Forgiveness doesn't erase memories, but it opens a door to move forward. That day, I hugged my mother, not because she deserved it instantly, but because I wanted Lily to grow up in a family that knew love over comparison. I knew healing wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time, we'd walked half the distance, from denial to acceptance. And perhaps from here, the Carter family would relearn the simplest lesson: love, forgiveness, and true value. Looking back, I realized happiness isn't in grand mansions or million-dollar contracts, but in sincere presence, in arms that hold you when you fall, in eyes that see you when the world turns away. My story isn't just a tragedy of favoritism or a quest for recognition, but a journey to find true worth, love, forgiveness, and the courage to set boundaries with toxic things, even family. I learned to forgive, not because the past deserved it, but for my future and my daughters. If you've ever been misjudged or fought to be truly loved, I hope this story shows you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to join me in the next stories. We'll keep seeking and sharing human lessons, so everyone knows they deserve to be loved.